Hello, welcome to The Week Ahead with me, Ibrahim Sani. This show is an item that we're going to explore some of the key events that is going to take place over the next 7 days. We're broadcasting from the All Asia Broadcasting Centre here in Bukit Jalil, Kuala Lumpur. Of course, the big idea right now that is going to happen next week is, of course, the World Economic Forum. This is largely because leaders from around the globe is ready to meet at Davos, Switzerland for the World Economic Forum's annual meeting 2022. The meeting is centered around the theme of history at a turning point, government policies and business strategies. Nearly 2,500 leaders of politics, business, civil society and the media is going to participate at the unique Spring 2022 annual meeting. The world's top leaders from politics and all this is going to come in to descend on the Swiss mountain village of Davos as the World Economic Forum hosts the first in-person annual meeting for more than 2 years. The extraordinary event takes place at the watershed moment of 22nd until 26th of May. And of course, we're going to be covering that live. And of course, we're bringing you updates because my colleague Najib Aruf, as well as the editor-in-chief of Astro AWANI, Ashwat Ismail, is going to visit the area there and is going to attend some of the meetings as well. Here is Carl Schwab, the executive chairman of WEF, speaking about the issue.
Thus, our big question in Davos should be, how do we develop the necessary personal, national, global resilience to be much better equipped in the future, not only for a virus, but for any breakdown of our life-supporting systems? Evidently, the protection of nature and climate comes first to mind. We all know that humankind has been left with only a few years to change course. The window of opportunity is rapidly closing. Therefore, Davos 2022 must and will also be a climate summit. It will bring together the most relevant actors and it will drive action for all the forum's initiatives in this field. That includes the First Movers Coalition launched at UN Climate Summit COP26, the 1 Trillion Trees Project, and many more. Also, fostering energy transformation will be at the center of many discussions in Davos.
Jelasnya, penduduk dunia telah menyaksikan implikasi akibat daripada pandemik COVID-19 sejak 2 tahun lalu. Virus ini merumitkan krisis kemanusiaan yang dihadapi dan ia turut dirasai segenap lapisan masyarakat. Inflasi katanya turut membarah yang mana sekaligus memberi implikasi kepada kehilangan kuasa beli di serata dunia. Namun ia tidak hanya terhenti di situ. Dunia turut menerima kesan daripada peperangan yang berlaku dalam abad ke-21 ini melibatkan Rusia dan Ukraine apabila ia menjadi ancaman terbesar dalam keselamatan antarabangsa.
Our first thoughts are with the war in Ukraine. Russia's aggression on the country will be seen in future history books as a breakdown of the post-World War II and post-Cold War order. This is the reason why we speak about a turning point in history. In Davos, our solidarity is foremost with the people suffering from the atrocities of this war.
Cabaran ini katanya tidak boleh hanya diselesaikan kerajaan, sektor korporat dan masyarakat awam sahaja. Sebaliknya memerlukan penglibatan setiap organisasi antarabangsa serta sektor awam. Ia bagi memacu ekonomi baru dengan mentransformasi sektor sedia ada menerusi teknologi canggih. WEF 2022 Davos akan mengumpul ilmuwan, cendekiawan, pakar serta pemimpin dunia bagi mencari titik tengah kepada krisis yang semakin berlarutan.
So the meeting is going to be centered around the theme of history at a turning point, government policies and business strategies. It happens to be the most consequential geopolitical and geo-economic moment of the past 3 decades and against the backdrop of a once-in-a-century pandemic. The World Economic Forum has highlighted the fact that the war in Ukraine and the resulting tragedy calls for a global moral action. Leaders must address urgent humanitarian and security challenges as they simultaneously advance long-standing economic and environmental societal priorities. All this while reinforcing reinforcing the foundations of a global system. In my opinion, I'm trying to understand more from the mega trends as well, from climate change, from food security, from geopolitical tensions, and most importantly, energy crisis. All this needs clear vision and unity and purpose on how the conversation at WEF is going to create a crucial environment for making progress against the unprecedented complexity of a multipolar world. Now, during the conversation of WEF from May 22nd until May 26th, we're looking at how the meeting can provide a unique environment in which to reconnect some of the ideas that were left behind from 2020 pre-pandemic. We're trying to understand more about how insights can be exchanged and how fresh perspectives can be garnered. So we're trying to understand also what's the conversation going to look like and where's the impact. Here, the WEF is trying to articulate the philosophy of collective action and how the meeting is going to be starting for a new era of global responsibility and cooperation. WEF is a very lofty kind of ideal. Not many people kind of agrees to it because of the lofty ideals, but what we're looking at is perhaps some ideas of trying to address some of the concerns. So the sessions apparently will try to address a few areas. Number one, global cooperation. Number two, economic rebalancing. Number three, society and equity and global healthcare. Number four, nature and food and climate industries. Number five, industry of transformation itself. And finally, the idea of innovation, governance, and cyber security. So the focus is on setting strategies for impact. I don't know how they can do that because we're looking at various stakeholders coming in, but it's worth noting that if there could be some sparks of ideas of how to execute it, it's going to be quite interesting. And of course, building new frontiers and creating viable scenarios for future impact. To recap, more than 50 heads of state and government are expected to join. In Malaysia, the Minister of Finance, Tengku Datuk Sri Zafrul Aziz, is going, along with a few Malaysian delegates. As mentioned earlier, Astro AWANI will be there as well in Davos over the next few days. And of course, as well as 300 governmental representatives are also expected to attend to share their vision over this. So a lot of information and a lot of news are going to be brought forward from the WEF by us, Astro AWANI. Do stay tuned for that. Now we move on to the idea of food security as well, because the United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the war in Ukraine is creating the largest global food security crisis of our time. Russia and Ukraine produce a third of the world's wheat supply, and the loss of commodities due to the war has resulted in soaring food prices and uncertainty about the future of food security globally, especially in impoverished countries. As part of the effort to address the crisis, Blinken is convening meetings in New York on the sidelines of the UN, focusing on food insecurity. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the Russian invasion in Ukraine is amplifying and accelerating all these factors, including climate change, including COVID-19 and inequality. Now, this threatens to tip tens of millions of people over the edge into food insecurity, followed by malnutrition, mass hunger and famine, and a crisis that could last for years.
But let's be clear, there is no effective solution to the food crisis without reintegrating Ukraine's food production, as well as the food and fertilizer produced by Russia and Belarus, into world markets despite the war. Developing countries must have access to liquidity so that they can provide social protection to everyone in need. International financial institutions need to step in with generous investments to prevent a global debt crisis. There is no answer to the food crisis without an answer to the finance crisis.
As you can see, what the United Nations SecGen said, there is no answer to food security if there's no answer to financial security. So those two elements are going to be debated over the next few days, not just at the United Nations meeting, but of course the WEF as well. How do you create a situation where the two items can come hand in hand? And that's why, for this week, do keep an eye out for the United Nations launching a 5-point plan to jumpstart broader use of renewable energies, hoping to revive world attention on climate change and the United Nations Weather Agency. Because the United Nations Weather Agency does report that the greenhouse gas concentrations, ocean heat, sea level rise, and ocean acidification has hit new records last year. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned about the possible environmental disaster that comes after World Meteorological Organization issued its State of the Climate report for last year, for 2021, which said that the last 7 years were the hottest 7 years on record. In his plan, which leans into the United Nations Climate Conference taking place in Egypt this week, Guterres called for fostering technology transfer and lifting of intellectual property protections in renewable energies and renewable technologies such as battery storage. Guterres wants to broaden access to supply chains and raw materials that go into renewable technologies. This is in turn going to concentrate or remove the concentration in a few powerful countries.
This is why today I am proposing 5 critical actions to jumpstart the renewable energy transition. First, renewable energy technologies such as battery storage must be treated as essential and freely available global public goods. Removing obstacles to knowledge sharing and technological transfer, including intellectual property constraints, is crucial for a rapid and fair renewable energy transition. Storing renewable electricity is often cited as the greatest barrier to the clean energy transition. I'm therefore calling for a global coalition on battery storage to fast-track innovation and deployment. A coalition led and driven by governments, bringing together tech companies, manufacturers and financiers.
Okay, we'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll continue with a little bit more on the week ahead. Welcome back to the week ahead. Also quite interesting for this week is on the China restructuring. This is because they're going to be touching on a few areas of restructuring following the speech by Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. Li Keqiang is a member of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, or the Political Bureau of the Communist Party of China's Central Committee. He has urged efforts to stabilize growth and ensure employment nationwide amid the downward pressure on the Chinese economy. With regard to some of the weakened economic indexes and the downward pressure on the economy brought forward by the COVID-19 pandemic and the uncertainties of the international situation since March, especially since April, Li Keqiang called on the governments at all levels to remain confident and face up to the difficulties, as there's still room for policy changes and how they can manage those kind of challenges. Li called for efforts to effectively coordinate epidemic prevention and to allow for control with economic and social development, as long as the implementation of the policies are adopted as quickly as possible. He has urged local authorities to take all proper measures to ensure that the economic reforms properly perform within the appropriate range of the first 6 months as well as in the whole year. Li Keqiang stressed efforts to ensure employment and people's livelihoods do come across through stabilizing the market players, and all efforts should be made to fully implement the incentive policies made recently by central government agencies to ease the financial burden on enterprises, and as well as to introduce tax rebates and administrative fee cuts and encourage financial institutions to provide preferential loans for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as self-employed individuals, while allowing interest payment deferral to be done. The Premier also emphasized efforts to stabilize grain production and energy supply to facilitate logistics, sharpen the state-owned enterprises' competitiveness and boost the private enterprises' confidence, and also to support the platform economy and the digital economy's lawful listing at home and abroad. This is meant to stabilize housing prices for people's rational demand. Also next week, we're looking at some ideas on how Malaysia and Thailand is going to set up the Joint Special Committee to fine-tune matters related to the proposed high-speed rail project linking KL with Bangkok. Here is Dr. Carmelo Ferlito from the Centre for Market Education as he explores the viability of the proposal, i.e. the high-speed rail between Kuala Lumpur to Bangkok, and just how much a project like that of that scale can actually improve the movement of people and goods within this area. Take a look.
I was proposing that we should have thought about something more holistic, a complete north-south connection that could cover the whole Malaysia, both for passengers and cargo, and include eventually Singapore and Thailand. Of course, we need to do a feasibility study for the project, but the idea is quite appealing to me and is a way also to move toward a different way of connectivity. We keep on talking about energy transition, And this is surely an occasion that we can use to rethink about globally in the region about our transportation system for both cargo and passengers. And I think a reflection is very much needed on this.
The high-speed rail project was originally planned to connect Kuala Lumpur to Singapore. But plans fell through as Malaysia suffered financial difficulties, part of which were brought on by the pandemic, and leaving the country with 320 million ringgit in compensation owed to Singapore. Carmelo said it is time to rethink the way mega projects are funded and make way for developers and other private institutions to be involved.
They must be involved in urban development designing since the project moment and become part of the financing, the financial part of the project, so they can build infrastructure and, of course, gain also the economic advantages coming from exploiting these infrastructure. Don't think about government-funded infrastructures anymore. We need to move toward a different model, and I think that this new project, this HSR project, give us the possibility to include the entrepreneurial rail model into the feasibility study and see if by enlarging the base for financing by involving private institutions and specifically the developers into the project since the very beginning can help us to develop a completely new way of designing cities and designing the future of mobility.
I will go for one short break. When we come back, we'll conclude our conversation on the week ahead. Welcome back. In the week ahead, we're going to be looking at some of the logistical issues as well, affecting our global population and moving goods and services. In our show, sister show called Niaga Awani, we spoke to Soham Chokshi, the CEO and co-founder of a logistics management company, Shipsy, talking at length about this. So perhaps next week, some items, particularly when it comes to logistics, will be a main concern for many. Take a look into the conversation between Niaga Awani with Soham Chokshi, the CEO and co-founder of Shipsy. Joining us all the way from India is Soham Chokshi, the CEO and co-founder of a logistics management firm, Shipsy. Soham, thanks for taking the time to speak with us. I want to ask you a little bit more about route optimization, for instance, reducing miles of travel and avoiding traffic congestion. We know that this can reduce harmful CO2 emissions by more than 37 million metric tons annually, but how does this affect businesses per se? Soham.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, you know what's happened over the last few years, right? End consumers like you and I, the way we shop, the way we purchase things, the way we get things delivered has completely changed, right? A lot of it has moved to home deliveries, right? And what this means is that the total distance traveled by a package really increases. So essentially how route planning works is that when a particular package gets delivered to your doorstep from a warehouse, right, the route optimization system essentially sees how the entire sequence of delivery points can be done such that the total distance traveled overall by all the drivers in that particular warehouse or hub reduces. Essentially, what this has meant is retailers, logistics companies, and all the other entities that are involved in the entire delivery process, they need to adapt, they need to implement these tools and technologies to see how they can really reduce the total distance traveled, thereby reducing their cost and also driving sustainability.
Soham, how do we then drive sustainable logistics operations under these conditions?
Sure, absolutely. So, as you know, distance traveled, right, is one of the biggest metrics that is used to determine the total carbon footprint, right? So essentially, if you really look at it from an objective perspective, the system should aim to reduce the total distance traveled of a particular package, right? Now, this involves a lot of different technologies, right? The first is a very accurate geocoding, which means converting the text address that you give to an accurate latitude and longitude. This allows the driver to really navigate to your location without having to move around a lot. All right. So that's the first thing. Second is the route planning and optimization system itself, right? To really accurately see if a vehicle has a certain capacity, let's say 10 tons, 15 tons, etc., right? How that capacity can be utilized completely and how the sequence of drop points for that particular vehicle can be adjusted such that the total distance reduces. The third one is to really see how we can substitute, a lot of the last mile delivery with electric vehicles. So what the system does, right? It also prioritizes vehicles that are, let's say, electric vehicles, right? And not just that. If you look at, say, things like grocery delivery or food delivery, the system also prioritizes, say, bicycle-based delivery for, let's say, within 1 kilometer distance, and things like that, right? Now all of these things, what it does is it reduces the total distance traveled, right, for the particular package, and the distance that is being traveled, it tries to prioritize the more environmental friendly modes of transportation such as electric vehicles and bicycles. So this is one segment in terms of really the whole distance travel. The second part is also how we can do this through a better communication with the end customer, right? So essentially reducing the total number of attempts, right? So essentially the missed attempts. So if you're not at home, how can we ensure that those are reduced? So again, through a more efficient communication with the end customer, with live tracking, things like that, seeing how we can reduce the total number of missed attempts such that the distance reduces.
As we can see by your explanation, we're driving processes in efficiencies as well as cost savings through end-to-end automation in logistics. I want to pick your brain on how you think 2022 is going to be shaping up, considering that most countries, if not all countries, are now coming back in full swing following the pandemic, 2 years, 2.5 years of the pandemic. Economies are warming up, interest rates are being raised in the US, in BOE, in India, and of course in Malaysia as well. Do you feel that the logistics business is just going to see an explosion in this year, or are you going to see a little bit more of a gradual increase over time?
Yeah, in fact, over the last couple of years, we've already seen a large increase in terms of the volumes, right? So if I were to compare from, let's say, 2017 to now, I think the volumes have become around 6 to 7x. Right, in terms of home deliveries overall, if I see at a country level, right? So that's a huge increase, right? And what this has meant is that, the kind of loads that are there on the logistics infrastructure, that increases. And I do see this constantly increasing because it's not just the traditional e-commerce, right? There is a whole new wave of, quick commerce, which is delivery of groceries, food, pharmacies, fish and meat, so many different items from your nearby stores to your home. So that's also another source of increase.
One other item, Soham, is of course trying to understand a bit better in terms of businesses investing in logistics. I don't know how much businesses think about logistics so much. I also don't know how much they are, allocating resources to grow or improve their current logistics setup. Where do you think businesses stand on this?
Yeah. No, absolutely. So this is constantly increasing, right? So if you look at business spend on logistics, right, because especially since things have moved to, say, home deliveries, all the large retailers, right, or logistics companies, everyone is now investing on a more efficient last mile infrastructure, right? Things that did not exist before, right? They are investing on this, and not just investing on the actual logistics. We see a lot of companies investing on the technology that goes behind running these logistics operations more efficiently and really driving a superior end customer experience, right? So that's where we see a lot of investments going.
So finally, do you think more logistics players like yourself are going to enter the market, or will existing players merge?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So essentially, see, we as Shipsy, we are a technology company. We support logistics companies, retail companies to really make the entire operations more efficient, right? So in that sense, we're an enabler. And we do see a lot more logistics companies entering the market, especially last mile delivery companies. The whole logistics ecosystem is getting, more and more disintermediated, right? Which means that you'll see a lot more last mile delivery companies that are coming up that serve more local regions, right? To ensure that the entire country can be covered. So we do see, a lot more of those coming up. We do see a lot more retailers coming up, especially, hyperlocal or quick commerce retailers that aim to bring goods to your doorsteps a lot faster in, say, 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So these are the two places where we really see growth that would be coming up, and where the need for technology and the need to drive sustainability in logistics through technology would come in.
So as you can see, that was our conversation with CEO and co-founder of Shipsy, Soham Chokshi. And of course, we're trying to understand a little bit better about how the logistical management is going to be done as well, particularly when it comes to the week ahead and how the conversation is going to take place, all the way from the UN meeting to the climate change meeting, to the World Economic Forum meeting, all that's happening in the week ahead. Do keep in touch with us. Ensure that you tell us what you think about the show, especially some of the stories that you want seen on the show. You can tweet to me at Ibrahim Saninet. It's going to come out on the bottom of your screen right now. So make sure that you do all you can in terms of trying to keep yourself updated and abreast with the news. Follow us on astroawani.com, especially when it comes to big stories that is happening in the week ahead. Until then, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.